Hello all, welcome to a new series of endgames. This time I'm going to cover Rook versus Pawns endgames. This is an important series because it will be a core to analyze future Rook endgames. Rook endgames are the most common by far, so the sooner we start to be specialists or master them, the better for us. In today's lesson, lesson number one, we are going to talk about the cutting off technique. So we get this position, and cutting off technique is very simple. We simply use our rook to cut off the king from the pawn. So with this play, we basically cut the king from reaching his own pawn. Uh, we need to notice that our king was not able to reach the pawn because if you know about the square rule, it's impossible to enter the square so the pawn can promote. So we need to use the rook. Basically, here we have two options, either the king move or the pawn advances. If the pawn advances, then it's very simple. We are going to use our rook again to grab the pawn. How we do it? We simply attack the pawn. The pawn now, of course, can't be protected by its own king, so needs to advance it again, and then we reach it very easily and we grab it, and this is a simple win. Rook and king versus king. So coming back to the start, we cut the king, and now imagine the king waits a bit. This allows us to bring our king. So since the king is not able to continue to protect the pawn because we are cutting it off, we can reach with our own king. So the king now moves, and we are going to grab a chance. Of course, here, if you notice, if the pawn advances, we simply use the same technique. We are going to use the rook to attack the pawn. So, for example, and then the pawn advances again, and we go behind and grab the pawn. So, as you can see, the pawn can't go very far. So the king moves again, and now we simply reach the pawn, and now it's very simple. It's impossible for the pawn to promote. And again, rook and king versus king. So this is easy. Uh, but for example, if in this same position it's black to play, let's move it for the black perspective. If it's black to play, then the king can reach its own pawn, and this will be a draw. So if we can't cut the king on the fifth rank, probably it will be a draw, unless we have other situations that can allow us to win again. So here, for example, black to move, the king advances and reaches the pawn. We try to give checks, but it's impossible to avoid that the pawn will be promoted, and then we need to sacrifice the rook for the promoted pawn, and it's a draw. Uh, Basically, this is the key position. So if we can cut the king on the fifth rank, then we are going to win this endgame very easily. The cutting off technique. Another position. So we need to remember that the fifth rank is the key rank because, for example, here the king already is on the fifth rank, so we are not able to just cut the king on the fourth rank because either we cut the king or we avoid the pawn to promote. So basically, we try to cut, but the pawn advances now, threatening to promote on next, and of course we just have this move, and this allows the enemy king to reach the pawn. So as you can see, we are going to have to sacrifice the rook again for the queen, and it's of course a draw. Last one. Sometimes the king is already connected with the pawn, and basically the king will need to go through the other side to keep supporting the pawn advanced to promote. So here the technique of the cutting off also works because although it doesn't cut really the king off the pawn, it's enough for our king to reach and we win the game. So for example, if of course if the pawn advances, this is really stupid from black, but okay, it may happen. Then we get the cutting off technique. We just need to approach the king. If the pawn advances again, we attack it, and we are going to to grab it some moves ahead, like we saw in the first position. So here the king needs to go to the other side. So the idea is to go support the pawn from the other side. Of course, we reach with our king in time. Let's see, trying to avoid that our king protects, but it's not enough. And we are going to reach the pawn again. So you see here. Now we are attacking the pawn, and it's impossible for black, and this will be a win. So as you can see, even if we are not able to cut completely the king from the pawn, if the king needs to waste a lot of moves to get to the other side, so here we can count 3 moves, then after, let me just show it here. So here, as I was talking, in 3 moves, the king will be here, and our king will reach here. Of course, if the king goes in front of the pawn, we simply wait a bit more, and it's impossible for the black king to keep up the shouldering, avoiding our king to approach the pawn, and it's basically a win. Coming back to a start, just to finish, when we get a simple position of rook versus pawn, the first thing we need to watch is if it's possible to cut immediately the king. We want to do it on the 5th rank, or of course 6 or 7, but this is the last rank possible to cut the king from the pawn. If we do it, it's a win guarantee. Okay, hope you have enjoyed, and see you in another lessons of the rook versus pawn endgame. See you.